Good morning, Falcons. Today we're going to talk about circles and completing the square. So another type of problem that appears with this equation of the circle is when you're given the general form of an equation and you need to turn it back into the standard form with completing the square. So the completing the square method, you may have seen this in your Algebra 1 classes for solving quadratics, but given x squared plus bx, we can form a perfect square trinomial by taking half of b and squaring it. So what that looks like is something like this. B divided by 2 squared, okay? So when we put that with what we already have here, the x squared plus bx, it's gonna look like this: ax squared plus bx plus, remember we're adding this, b over 2 squared. That will lead to the factored form. So we would factor this. It's a perfect square trinomial, and that's going to look like x plus b over 2 squared. So this is the important piece that we want to remember. We'll see that we're going to do a few calculations in order to get the information. So let's take a look at our instructions. For example 1, it says to find the center and radius of the circle defined by, and then it gives us this equation of the line in standard form. So we have to remember the form that we want it to look like for the equation of the circle, and that's going to be x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, okay? And if you remember, the center is the point h comma k, and then the radius is, of course, your r. So we're going to be rearranging this, and in order to do that, we're going to have to perform completing the square twice because we have x squared and y squared. So over here on the left, I'm going to work out the calculation for the x, but first I want to rearrange this so that it gets the x's together and the y's together, and that we move this 64 over, because ultimately what we want to do is we're going to be figuring out what we need to add to both sides in order to make it a perfect square trinomial. So I'm going to rewrite this as x squared plus 8x plus some number, we're going to find that out, and I'm going to close the parentheses, that, plus y squared minus 2y plus, again, some number, we're going to find that out, is equal to 64. Now, how did I get that 64 over there? Real quick, we just moved it over, plus 64 plus 64. And all I did so far was rearrange the equation to group our x's together, group our y's together, and we're going to be filling this in. Additionally, if we add anything to the left side of an equation, we also have to add it to the right side. So we're going to be adding 2 more things over here on the right, and we'll see that in just a moment. So first we're going to figure out what it is we need to add to make our x's the perfect square trinomial. So I'm just going to set up my formula, b divided by 2 squared, and then plug that value in. So we see that b is 8. So I'm going to do 8 divided by 2 squared. 8 divided by 2 is 4 squared. We know 4 squared is going to be 16. Now watch, I'm going to put this form in here because it's going to help me rewrite it as a factored form a little easier. But I'm going to add 16 because 4 squared is 16. If you want to write yourself a little note down here, you can also include that. Now we're going to do the y, and same idea, b divided by 2 squared. And so our b for the y's is negative 2 divided by 2. Don't forget to square it. So that's going to be negative 1 squared. And -1 times -1 is going to give us a +1. So here, I'll write it in that form, but here I'll write it in that form. So what happens is, if I just look at my x down here, the x expression, x squared plus 8x plus 4 squared, that's a perfect square trinomial. So just like we saw in our notes, we're going to write it in the factored form so it looks like our equation that we're trying to get. So I'm going to say x plus my b divided by 2, which was 4, squared. Okay, so we took this and we made it look like that. I'm going to do the same for my y's. So y, and then in this one, it was a minus. Notice I kept those that minus in parentheses as well. So that way I can just bring that in and square it. And then I need to do the quick addition on 64 plus 16. That's going to give me 80 plus 1 is 81. So now when it asks for the center and the radius, we're going to pull out the h value and the k value. So that's going to look like this. So my center is -4 and a +1. And then our radius is going to be the square root of this number. So I'm going to have to, because remember in the form, what's over here is r squared. So if I do r squared equals 81, then I know I would have to take the square root of both sides to give me r equals 9. So our radius here is going to equal 9. That's example 1. Take a moment, make sure that you have it all written down. We're going to move on to examples 2, 3, and 4. For number 2, same idea. We just need to rearrange this first. So for me, I'm going to do all the moving that I need to get my x's together and get the y's together, but we want the constant over on the far right hand side. So I'm going to add y squared, add x squared, and add the 24x, because I want to move all of those over to the left. This 6y is already here, so that's fine. But I do want to subtract this 137 to move the constant over. So I like to do this all in one line. You can draw the little kind of a boundary, if you will, and bring down what you have. Of course, I had to add these back over here too. So y squared, that was a plus y squared, a plus x squared, and then a plus 24x. So we're going to just rewrite this in the standard form. So I've got x squared plus y squared plus 24x plus 6y equals -137. So this is similar to what we saw in the first problem as far as how we kind of started. We just had to do some additional algebra to move things over in the right place. Now again, I'm going to rearrange it so that our x's are together and the y's are together, and leave kind of a placeholder for what we're eventually going to be adding to create our perfect square trinomials. X squared plus 24x plus some number is equal to, or not, excuse me, not equal to, we're going to keep adding. We got to do our y's. Y squared plus 6y plus some number, there we go, is equal to -137. And again, we're going to be adding some numbers here as we create these perfect square trinomials. So over in the left, I'm going to do the same thing we did on example 1. I'll figure out what I have to add to make my perfect square trinomial for the x's. So b divided by 2 squared. In this case, our b is 24 divided by 2. That's going to give me, I'll just drop down here, 12 squared. So I'm going to add in here 12 squared, but I know that 12 squared is 144, so I'm going to add 144 over on the right. Then for our y, we'll do the same. B divided by 2 squared. And so this one is 6. So that's going to give me 3 squared. So I'm going to be adding 3 squared here, but I'm going to add it as 9 over here. So take a moment, just look at what we've got going on. We've created our 2 perfect square trinomials. And now we're going to write those perfect square trinomials in factored form. So it's going to be x plus what we have in the parentheses there, 12 squared, plus y plus what we have in our parentheses, it's just going to be 3 squared, equals, now we have to do some arithmetic here. So negative 137 plus 144, that's going to give me 7. 7 plus 9 is 16. So now it looks like, and I'm going to write this up here so I have it handy, x minus h quantity squared plus y minus k quantity squared is equal to r squared. So now we know, again, we're looking for the center, which is our h comma k, and the radius, which is just equal to the r. So we're going to have to solve for the r, but we can go ahead and write out our center. Since the form is x minus h, we know we're going to have to take the opposite of that, so that's going to be negative 12 and negative 3. And then our radius, remember this here is r squared, so r squared equals 16, r equals 4. Okay, take a moment, make sure you've got everything down for example 2 as we move on to number 3. Same deal here, this one's nice. It go ahead and gives it to us here in our general form so that we can just rearrange and write it as we need. So I'm gonna say x squared plus 14x plus some number plus, so we took care of our x's, now we're gonna take care of our y's, y squared minus 12y plus some number equals, and remember I'm gonna move that constant over, so I should have negative 4 here. We're going to be adding some numbers there. So once we get that set up, now we're going to do our b divided by 2 squared. So for the x, it's going to be 14 divided by 2 squared, or 7 squared, which is 49. So here I write it as 7 squared, here I'll write it as 49. Let's do our y. b divided by 2 squared equals, in this case we have negative 12 squared, right? Negative 12 divided by 2 squared, so that's going to give us negative 6 squared. And then I know negative 6 times negative 6, that's going to be 36, so I'll squeeze that in there. Let's go ahead and write it in factored form. X plus 7, y minus 6. And here we'll work the addition. So negative 4 plus 49 is going to be 45. 45 plus 36, that'll give me 81. Then I'm going to find my center. I pull my center out at negative 7 comma 6. And our radius, remember we have r squared, and so our r is going to be 9. Okay, take a moment, make sure that you have that problem down, and then we'll finish it up with number 4. Okay, last problem. Find the center and radius of a circle defined by. So we need to do some moving here. I'm just going to move this 2y, so I'll just throw it under here, 2y. And then we can rewrite it like this, or we can just rearrange it as we need it. I want my x's to come first, so that's going to be x squared plus, I've got 2x. We know we're going to need to add something there. Then we'll do our y's. Y squared minus 2y plus some number is equal to, our constant was already on the right side, so we're just gonna bring that down at 23 and then see what we need to add. For our x, it's gonna look like 2 divided by 2 squared, or 1 squared. We know 1 squared is 1, so here I write it as 1 squared. Over here I'm just gonna write it as 1. For the y, our b divided by 2 squared is negative 2 over 2 squared, or negative 1 squared, which that's also 1. Put it as negative 1 squared here, and then here we just write it as 1. Now we're going to rewrite in factored form and pull out the center and the radius. So I've got x plus 1 squared plus y minus 1 squared equals 23, 24, 25. That puts our center at negative 1 comma 1, and our radius, remember we're doing the square root of the number on the right, so that's going to give us an r of 5. And that's completing the square for helping you with circles. If you have questions, make sure you talk to your teachers, and be sure to do the practice set. Have a great day.